I think as teachers, one of the things we have to do is sometimes we give students things to do and talk about certain topics in class that we need to be confident that we can talk about ourselves. I also think with critical thinking activities, it highlights the need. Sometimes you need just 1 or 2 minutes preparation time to think about what you're going to say before you ask the students to do it. You maybe had those classes, you know, when you've had discussion classes and you come out of class and say, my students have no opinions, they never discuss anything, I can't get a discussion going in class. Yeah, you've had those lessons and it's very frustrating. I think sometimes it's a question of this kind of thing to give students the language they need, but also to give students some processing time to think about what they're going to say as well. Let's move on to critical thinking to help deeper processing of language. I think critical thinking activities make students memorize language better, but they also help students discover language. Are you ready for a bit of neuroscience? Okay? There's an interesting theory of the brain. It is a theory and people question it. But there's a neuroscientist called James Zoll, whose background is studying the activity in people's brains. He's also an educator, but he's interested in how the brain actually works when it's learning things, basically. And he has an interesting theory. So here we got the brain, and just so that you can recognize which part is which, the eyes are over here, okay? So when you're at the cinema and you're watching a Hollywood action film, you're watching it here and the information is travelling actually to the back of the brain, and the back of the brain is gathering it here. And probably if you're watching a movie, it's not going any further. You're just gathering it and it's entertaining you. And sometimes when you're teaching, you have the feeling that you're just talking and it's being gathered here and it's not really going any further, yeah? You've had those kinds of lessons, all right? The job of the teacher, Zoll would say, is to help students gather the information here and then push it to the lower part of the brain and start to reflect on what they've learned. He said, could say the critical thinking is going on here. And if you watch the brain activity on scans, you'll see lots of activity going on in this bit of the brain. And then when you give students a creative thinking task, you'll see lots of activity going on in this bit of the brain. So we're trying to pull the information here and push it around here, and eventually students test it out. And when your students make mistakes in class, all they're doing is testing it out with the top bit of the brain. Now, some people disagree with Zoll, but it's an interesting idea, and it reflects this idea of lower order to higher order thinking. This notion that we take language and we push it around the brain and we use the whole brain. It's kind of like whole brain learning if we help students use the language in that way. So, it makes students think more deeply. And it goes back to the idea that if we just tell students the rule, it will probably just gather here. If we help students discover the rule and experiment with the rule, they'll start to use more of the brain. And I think critical thinking activities do that because they encourage discovery. So I'm going to try a bit of deep processing with you, okay? Don't worry, it won't hurt, alright? It's just going to try to get you using a bit more of the brain. I'm going to go past these. But if I give you an exercise like this comes from a reading activity. Now, I've had students do some comprehension work with the reading task. Yeah, they've checked their basic understanding. Then I've pulled out 6 sentences from the text. And I've said to students, I want you to go back to those sentences and categorise them. Is the sentence expressing a fact? Is it giving the author's opinion, or is it reporting other people's opinion? With the person next to you, just look at the 6 sentences and categorise them, but also identify what language is it in the sentence that gives you the answer. Okay? See if you can work out the answers for the 6.